Hello and welcome back for Module 3 for the January Gansey workshop. This week we are talking about underarm gussets, and we'll be talking about the transition from working in the round to working flat and just a few things you'll want to keep in mind as you make that transition. Hopefully you're making some great progress on your Ganseys. I've been seeing lots of gorgeous cables happening and lots of beautiful yarns and projects underway. So hopefully you are following right along and you're seeing some great stitches coming off those needles. And you're getting closer to this point, whether you're actually ready for gussets yet or not. Hopefully as you're working forward, you're getting closer. So let's talk about the best way to make that transition and just a little bit more in depth about what it is the gussets are doing and how they're coming together. Make sure that you access the link in the pattern file. It's in the January Gansey pattern. It's linked in a couple of different places. It will take you to the January Gansey tutorials page on my website at oliveKnits.com, and that has photos and more in-depth information specifically about the gussets. And that's really handy because when you can see exactly what it is you're trying to create, it can make it a little bit more clear for you. So a gusset basically is any time we take a flat piece of fabric and then we start to create shaping in the form of a triangle. And it gives us the opportunity to add a better fit. Instead of just a flat square piece, we actually can create some shaping. So if you think of a thumb gusset on mittens, it's much the same concept and it's done in exactly the same way, really. So as you're working on your gussets, you're going to place markers and you're going to be working increases on either side of those markers. So as you go in gusset round 1, you're going to place markers, and it will be markers C, D, E, and F, and those will be the markers that house the start of the gusset. And when it begins, you will have just a couple of stitches in the center with 2 markers, 1 marker on either side of your gusset. And every time you get to those gusset markers, you're going to do one of 2 things. You'll either work increases right next to the markers on either side, or it'll be a non-increase row, because just like with other parts of sweaters, when we do increases, we'll do an increase row and a non-increase row. The same will be true for the gussets. You'll do 1 row on gusset round 1 where you'll work increases. You'll place the markers and you'll do your first set of increases. And then when you go to round 2, you're just going to work your round like normal. Keep in mind, you're still doing the front and back of the sweater, all the cables just the same way you have been. Now you're just adding this one extra thing, these extra markers with little increases that will start to build this little inverted triangle for your gusset shaping under the arm. It's going to give a nice comfortable fit around the arm so there's no strain on the underarm stitches. And it's also going to create that really beautiful armpit we've been talking about so much. So as you're working on it, when you get to round 3, this is an increase round. And so you'll already have your markers where they belong. And just keep in mind, you're always increasing inside the markers right next to the marker. The most important thing is give it a try. Just start doing it and it will start to make sense as you go. And it's one of those things where it's so much easier if you just dive in and do it rather than waiting and being nervous that you're going to make a mistake. It's just knitting and you can always back up a little bit if you realize you've gotten astray somewhere. But the main and most important part is just to make sure that you understand the visual of what you're trying to accomplish with your gusset. Make sure you look at those photos because it's a great resource to see exactly what it is you're trying to accomplish, where your markers should be, and remember you're always increasing right next to the markers. Now on gusset round 3, the first time you work that round, you'll knit 2 before you make 1 left and slip the marker C. When you go to repeat that, it'll be an extra stitch each time because you have been working increases. So just remember to always knit to the marker and then make the increase when you are repeating round 3 at that very beginning of gusset round 3. Once you get to that, it'll make a little bit more sense. But make sure that you don't get overwhelmed because the gussets really are very, very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated, but we get sometimes a little bit overwhelmed when something like we're not exactly sure what we're doing or we can't see where this path is trying to take us, which is why I think looking at the photos is really helpful And I've demonstrated on the photos where the markers should be, so you can kind of have a visual of where you're heading, and that can make it a little bit less murky. I think as we move forward, when we feel like we don't know where we're headed, it can get overwhelming, but it doesn't need to be. Once you do a couple rounds for the gussets, you're going to think, wow, this is a cinch and this is awesome, because it's going to look so cool and you're going to have this really cool underarm. So I'm really excited for you to see those gussets come to life. And I just wanted to make sure and talk in more detail about that process, and make sure that you access the tutorials. They are linked in the pattern in a couple of different places. So please, please make sure that you access those, because that will be your best friend in making sure you're on the right track. And then you won't have to worry, does my gusset look right? Did I do this right? Am I headed in the right direction? You'll actually be able to see exactly what it should look like, and you'll know if you've done it correctly. And worst case, you back up a little bit if you didn't quite get it the first time, but it's a pretty fun process. And once you do it, it'll make total sense. And with that in mind too, also harken back to any experience you have knitting mittens. If you have done a thumb gusset before, same concept. So nothing to be afraid of. It's really quite a lot of fun. And once you see it come together, you're going to be really thrilled with the results. Now the next thing we need to talk about is switching to working flat. Now, we've talked about in the last module, if you do want to add a little bit to the size, to the ease, this is the right time to change needles. If you want to go beyond the ease that you already figured out in your original swatching, if you think, gosh, as I'm trying this on, I realize I do want even more room, this is a good time to go up a size. But I also want you to remember to keep in mind that as you begin working flat, sometimes that can change your gauge. If you swatched flat in the beginning, then you already know what to expect, so you're going to be good to go. But as you start the flat, so first you're going to work on the front section. And when you finish the front and you go to work on the back, you're working the back the same way you did the front. But I do want to give you one other caution. Remember, so as you work across the front and then stop and put those back stitches on a holder, and then you're working back and forth on your front from there, the pattern does tell you this, you may need to cut the yarn and start on the other edge so that you're always keeping your cables on the right side. But with that in mind, when you go to pick up the back, you will probably need to work a wrong side row, a non-cable row, so that you can be starting on the front for a cable, because you want to make sure that you're not doing your cables on the wrong side, number one, and number two, you don't want to do the cables a row too soon so that they're smushed together. So make sure when you go to work the back side, you may not get to that for another couple of weeks, but when you do, please keep in mind that you will need to, when you go to pick up those back stitches, you'll need to work on the wrong side one row, that's a non-cable row, and then get to the front side when you're ready to start working the cables again. That's really the only trick with working the front and back, is just to make sure that you set yourself up with cables on the front side, not trying to do the cables on the wrong side, because that is frustrating and a little bit confusing, frankly. So just all you have to do is cut your yarn, move it to the other side, and make sure you start where it will allow you to do the non-cable rows on the wrong side and the cable rows on the right side. That will keep your front and back in alignment. Those two things are going to be the biggest time consumer for the next couple of weeks for you. There's a lot of cabling, there's a lot of endless stretches of back and forth, and especially once you finish those gussets and those are on a little stitch holder or some waist yarn, and you've got half the other stitches for the back on the waist yarn, it's really just back and forth, straight shot. It goes faster than you would think, but at the same time, it is a lot of the same thing over and over. So this is a good time to enlist the support of audiobooks and streaming movies or social knitting if you can concentrate on cables while you're social knitting, things like that, just to kind of help it go along, because it is sort of a long process. But the great thing is, once you finish the front and the back, really from there, it's just the shoulders, which is going to be a fun little deep dive into some new techniques for most of you. But then it's sleeves, and as I talked about last module, this time around, this sweater, you're probably going to feel like the sleeves are a welcome break from all the cables. So it's kind of funny. It's a rare time when you're going to get to Sleeve Island and think, this is nice. This is more like sleeve skiing because it's going to go much more quickly for you than the cables. So that's just around the corner, and that's a fun thing to look forward to. I know for me, when I was working on my Gansey, I just kept looking forward to the sleeves, thinking, oh, if I could just get to the sleeves. And what's great is I don't usually feel that way about my sweater sleeves. So hopefully you'll feel the same way and have a lot of fun working on those stockinette sleeves after all of that cabling. So this week mostly is just putting your head down and getting the work done. Keep going. I know it can be hard when we're working on a long project, a sweater, especially a sweater that has a lot of texture and requires a lot of focus. um, I definitely understand that after a while it can feel like you'll never see the end, but you will. And the most important thing is that you just keep going. Give yourself little goals like get, 2 or 3 cable repeats done a day or 1 cable repeat done a day, whatever it is you can do that works for you that doesn't feel like too much. But it's really important to try and work on it every day if you can, because that's going to allow you to see results and actually get to the finish line. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing a project linger forever. And this doesn't have to. I promise if you just do a little bit every day, keep going, eventually you really are going to have a sweater, and it really is going to get there. So keep going and stay strong. Now, one more little thought for the week is remember to periodically take a moment to celebrate your progress. Put your needles on 2 different long circulars and try it on, see how it feels. Remember that it's okay for it to be a little snug right now because it hasn't been blocked, and those cables will really want to pull in right now, especially before they're blocked. But it's good to just every so often just get a little feel for it. And what I like to do is when I do put it on 2 needles, I will pull it all the way up to my bust too, because essentially the stitch count is going to be the same. There's going to be a little bit of a shift because of the sleeve will be there eventually, and that'll kind of add a little bit. But for the most part, whatever you have on your cables while you're in the round will be very similar to what you have when you get the upper part of the body done. So you can kind of pull it up and just try it on, try the fit on over your bust and just see how you're liking it. But either way, whether you want to try it on as you go or you just don't want to hassle with it, hopefully you are staying motivated and encouraged. And I will look forward to seeing you next week for Module 4. Keep on knitting. You're doing a great job. Bye.